Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Secondary Education in the District, cum laude from the Philippine Normal University, Manila, the National Center for Teacher Education. He is currently taking up Master of Arts in History at the University of the Philippines, Philippine. His research interest focuses on the history of aviation and air travel in the Philippines with greater learning on the commercial sector. The person is affiliated with the social sciences area of the Institute of Liberal Arts and Sciences of the Philippine State College of Aeronautics as a faculty and researcher. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Patrick Jan Mansujeto.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for the invitation. Maybe you are very much wondering why a person from the Aviation Academy is here at the Maritime Academy or the maritime industry. During the early years of the aviation industry, many terminologies such as flying boats, clippers, airships, no? The origin are from maritime ay nagpunta sa aviation. So very related yung ating mga industry because they are transport and mobility industry as well as masasabi natin na mas kayo yung magulang ng industry na kinagilihan. So for this afternoon, my talk will be about the Spanish Galleons, American Hurricanes, the Pan-American Clipper, and the Trans-Pacific Crossing. I will try to discuss how the romance of the Trans-Pacific Crossing, first immortalized in the Spanish Galleons, was revived by the first successful Trans-Pacific flight of the Pan-American Clipper from San Francisco to Manila in 1935 during the American colonial period. Next slide. Wednesday, the 28th of November 1520, we came forth out of the said strait and entered into the Pacific Sea, where we remained 3 months and 20 days without taking in provisions or other refreshments. We only ate oat biscuit reduced to powder and full of drops and stinking from the dirt, which the rat had made on when eating the good biscuit. And we drank water that was yellow and stinking. This is how Antonio Figapetta, the chronicler of Magellan's expedition, described their arduous crossing of the Mar Pacifico, or the Pacific Ocean, which later will be confirmed as the largest of the world's bodies of water. Next one. This is the first documented travel and crossing of the Pacific Ocean from the New World, or the Americas, going to the Orient by a European. His route will later on followed by other failed expeditions sent by Spain to colonize the archipelago, such as those of Cofre de Roais in 1525, Sebastian Cabot in 1526, Alvaro de Saavedra in 1527, and Roy Lopez de Villalobos, who named the archipelago Las Islas Filipinas in honor of Crown Prince Philip of Spain in 1542. Next slide. All field expedition, those started in Mexico, went back to Spain using the eastern route, passing the Indian Ocean, then to Cape of Good Hope, and all the way to Africa, up to Europe. Next slide. Another expedition was sent, this time headed by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, accompanied by a veteran mariner, soldier turned priest named Andres de Ordaneta. The expedition has an additional task, which is to discover the route from the Philippines back to Nueva España or Mexico, or what is famously called as the Toro Viaje. Dinidiscuss kanina ni Dr. Abrera. Next slide. After cementing Spain's position in Cebu, Legazpi tasked his own grandson, Felipe de Salcedo, under the guidelines of Fray Urdaneta, to go back to Mexico to finally fulfill their task and carry letters of report regarding the development of the expedition. A friar named Gaspar de San Agustin wrote in his memoir how the voyage going to Acapulco ended. So after 4 months, Father Urdaneta recognized the port of La Natividad in less than 4 months from the day they left Cebu. He did not stop there, knowing his ship was decimated. He went instead to Acapulco, since it was the best port in the world and the closest to Mexico. On 30th of October 1565, he dropped anchor at its mouth because he felt this was the best place. So finally, the Spaniards successfully crossed the Pacific Ocean from Americas to Asia, then from Asia back to the America in 1565. Next slide. The success of Urdaneta's undertaking made the Trans-Pacific voyage from the New World to the Orient and back a reality. This started the world-renowned Galleon trade. The Galleon trade is a 2.5 century of economic enterprise that crossed the Pacific Ocean. It was part of an expansive global trade that connects Asia, the Americas, and Europe. Asian products such as porcelain, silk, spices, precious metals, and other oddities conveyed to the port of Manila, which Galleon once described as the mistress of so many seas and port of so many archipelagos. The products were loaded to a galleon, which was also called as now the China or now the Manila. It crosses the vast Pacific to Acapulco. Then the products travel overland to the Atlantic side of Mexico, then transported again by ships to the European market. From the New World, silver was sent to Manila to buy these Oriental demands, completing the first global economy. Aside from being an economic enterprise, the Galleon trade has become a cultural vehicle that made cultural exchanges between the Philippines and Mexico possible. This even made the colonial connections of the archipelago stronger to the Viceroyalty of Nueva España rather than to the Spanish mainland. It was a symbol of Spanish colonization and imperialism that connects and holds the vast empire together. Next slide. Because of the hardship and challenges of the voyage of the Galleon, it later on captured the imagination of both writers and historians alike. The world traveler Italian Galleon recounted his experience in traveling with the Galleon in 1700. He said, "Notwithstanding the dreadful sufferings in this prodigious voyage, for my own part, this or greater hope shall prevail with me to undertake that voyage again, which is enough to destroy a man or make him unfit for anything as long as he lives." So kung mahirap ang pagiging seaman sa panahon niya ngayon, siguro mas mahirap yung pagiging marino noong panahon ng Galleon. Maaning na buwan ng palutang-lutang sa dagat ng Pasipiko patungong Acapulco. To the point na sinabi ni Camilo Carelli na it is enough to destroy a man. Sa Pacific Ocean, meron itong part na tinatulad sa suicide yung mga tao. Dahil sa sobrang hirap nila sa barko, tumatalo na lang sila to enter somewhere. Next slide, please. William Schurz, in his book, The Manila Galleon, maybe give us the most romantic conclusion regarding this legendary trade. He wrote, "Galleons made a long and lonely voyage between Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico. No other line of ship endured so long. No other regular navigation has ever endured, has been so trying and dangerous as this. For in its 250 years, the sea claimed dozens of ships and thousands of men, and many million in treasure." In 1815, the last galleon named Magellan put into port. Next slide, please. Then aviation entered the Philippines. The first successful airplane flight in the country happened in February 21, 1911. It is when James Bond Mars flew a Skylark biplane, which is the highlight of the 1911 Manila Carnival. It's just almost a decade since the first successful flight of the Wright brothers in 1903 in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Next slide. As the American consolidated their imperial power in the Philippines, aviation was further introduced in the colony. Almost annually, from 1911 to 1919, American aviation troops visited the country to excite, amaze, and entertain the Filipinos. Next slide. By 1919, an aviation school named Curtis School of Aviation was opened to train Filipinos who were interested in flying and aviation. By 1920, Alfredo Carmelo became the first Filipino pilot to fly solo a Curtis seaplane above the Manila Bay. So you can see the relationship between the maritime and the aviation industry during the earliest earliest time of the aviation in the Philippines. And actually, the Americans wanted to use seaplane in the Philippines because we are an archipelago country. At mas madaling mag-take off at mag-landing na hindi na gumagawa ng mga airports sa pamamagitan ng mga tinatawag natin airship or seaplane. Next slide please. By 1930s, Filipino-owned commercial airlines were also established, like the Philippine Aerial Taxi Corporation, which later on will be known as the Philippine Airlines, and the Iloilo Negros Air Express Company. If you look at the picture, the largest airplane of INAE, the Sikorsky, is actually a seaplane. It's the most luxurious passenger airplane in the Philippines in the 1930s. So it lands and takes off in water. And Guam as their stopover. Terminals and hotels were constructed on these island stopovers. Pan Am contacted Glenn and Martin Company to build 3 flying boats. So the term, diba? Flying boats that suited for the Trans-Pacific crossing. They were named as the China Clipper, the Philippine Clipper, and the Hawaiian Clipper. A large number of people, some estimated as high as 20,000, gathered in San Francisco to witness a momentous journey. It was Friday, 22nd of November, 1935. The route of the journey is from San Francisco, flying to Hawaii, then to Midway, then to Wake, stopping in Guam, and finally in Manila in the Philippines. The travel period is approximately 6 days, which is 21 days faster compared to the ocean liner flying the same route. So the ocean liner, the President liner, yung pinakasikat at Trans-Pacific liner during that time, took 30 days to cross from from San Francisco to Hawaii, going to Japan, going to Singapore, going to Hong Kong to Taiwan, then going to Manila. Kaya 30 days. Yung airplane, 6 days na. The flight will be done by China Clipper, the first of the 3 Martin M130 flying boat. It was named Clipper in honor of the 19th century sailing ship that is considered as the fastest of its kind. The San Francisco Chronicler drew a cartoon showing a China Clipper in flight over a 16th century Spanish galleon with a caption, "To Manila 6 days, to Manila 6 months." Diba yung galleon 6 months? This time, 6 days. The pilot was no other than Edward Music. His co-pilot is Captain Sullivan, Second Officer George King, Navigator, Fred Noonan. So meron sila no, Navigator, airplane na, pero Navigator pa rin yung tawag. First Engineering Officer C.D. Wright, Second Engineering Officer Victor Wright, and Radio Officer Victor Jarbo. Next slide. Speeches and salutations were both delivered and prepared from both sides of the Pacific. The event in San Francisco was attended by no less than the U.S. Postmaster General James A. Parley. The Postmaster General read the letter of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, who said that even at this distance, I thrill to the wonder of it all. The Times magazine dedicated a 1 whole week issue a week after the inaugural flight. It stated, "All eyes are now on the China Clipper, riding at her anchor just beyond our platform. What a thrilling shot sight she is. So confident, so sturdy, her gleaming hull and wings glistening in the sunshine, her great engines ready to speed her on her way." Next slide, please. In the Philippines, no less than Commonwealth President Manuel Quezon delivered the radio-transmitted speech for the inaugural flight. Quezon delivered. With the hearts and minds thrilled by the meaning of this flight, the Commonwealth of the Philippines, the people of the Orient, await the coming of the Clipper ship. Kahit si Manuel Quezon, nalilito pa siya kung Clipper ship ba yun or Clipper airplane. With them will come down a dawn of new and brighter age in the not too long distance east. Next slide. After the speeches and formalities, the China Clipper readied itself for the flight, and because it is a flying boat, it uses water to take off and land. Like a ship, it floated and went outside the protected pier into the San Francisco Bay. And then when all clear signal was given, it started to make speed for the takeoff. At exactly 3:46 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, with the help from its core engine, the aircraft flew into the air. Next slide. The aircraft proceeded to its next destination, the island of Hawaii. The flight from San Francisco to Hawaii is the farthest as well as the longest. The airplane reached Honolulu at 10:18 in the morning, November 23, Saturday, after traveling 2,410 miles for about 20 hours. The China Clipper left Pearl Harbor, November 24, Sunday, heading for Midway Island. Aside from the cargoes, the China Clipper also carried additional 19 passengers. All were employees of the Pan American Airways to be stationed on its bases in Midway and Wade. The distance from Hawaii to Midway is only about 1,380 miles, almost half of the first leg. The aircraft arrived at Midway at 2 p.m. in the afternoon at the same day. Spending a night in Midway, the China Clipper fly to Wake Island on November 25, Monday, 6:12 in the morning. Though it is considered as the shortest distance, next slide, with only about 1,252 miles, it was one of the most difficult and confusing part of the flight. Difficult in the sense that the Wake is a very small island and its waters were surrounded by corals. So yung corals, pwede na mag-damage yung airship. Aside from that, going to Wake, the China Clipper will pass the international date line, which will add a day to the calendar, thus making the arrival in Wake Island November 26, Tuesday, by November 27, Wednesday, 6 in the morning. So nag-additional sila ng island, ay ng day. The China Clipper left Wake for Guam. The distance between Guam is 1,560 miles, and it took the Clipper 9 hours to cover the landing. It arrived in Guam 3:05 in the afternoon in the same day. The Clipper received an instruction to rest one day for the reason that the welcome preparation in Manila is not yet ready due to confusion of days caused by the crossing of the international gates. Next slide, please. In Manila, preparation for the China's Philippine arrival was in full throttle. Juan Posadas, the mayor of the city, headed the committee to welcome the aircraft and its crew. Welcome arches were erected in a different part of Manila, which the crew of the aircraft will pass. A large crowd of people, numbering to 100,000, started to build up in Luneta in the Bay Area. Some people even hired bangka and other watercraft just to make sure they were in the front line of the Clipper's arrival. To control the peace and order, the Commonwealth government of the city of Manila deployed members of the Philippine Constabulary in selected outposts. On November 29, 6:12 a.m. Guam time, the Clipper take off in Guam and proceeded to the Philippines. The flight was to take 1,600 miles in less than 12 hours. Though it was the first time an airplane flew in this route, no difficulties was encountered. After 11 hours of flying the sea that separates the Philippines and Guam, the crew spotted the first signs of the Philippines, and it is the perfect cone of the Mayon volcano. As it entered the Philippine airspace, military planes from the United States Army and Navy escorted the Clipper. Next slide, please. When the China Clipper appeared in the skyline of Manila, people was amazed of its size, for no other airplane of that magnitude ever visited Manila. People cheered, clapped, and other climbed tree or anything that will elevate them and will give them a better view of the coming wonder. In the highways, automobiles and calesas stopped to take a look in a silver ship that's circling above Manila. So if you notice that this is the landing procedure of the China Clipper, landing in the Manila Bay in front of the Manila Hotel and Luneta Park. The wife of Carlos P. Romulo recounted in his diary, when the Clipper first appeared in Manila like an enormous bird that day, people ran out of their homes to watch it. At the Manila Hotel, guests ran out into the gardens to gape as the plane circled the hotel itself before swooping down into the bay with a shuddering splash of white water. then propelled itself with its engine up to the pontoon float which had been prepared for it at Cavite. So sa Cavite yung pier ng Manila Hotel, ay ng China Clipper. When the crew of the China Clipper disembarked, they were welcomed by Philippine Commonwealth Vice President Sir Jos Menia, Secretary of Public Works and Communication Antonio de las Alas, and Manila Mayor Juan Posadas. The ceremonies ended with Director Post Juan Luis symbolically stamping the letter of President Franklin Roosevelt to President Quezon with the date and time, November 29, 4:21 p.m., considered as the fastest mail sent from the United States to the Philippines at that time. Next slide, please. After the opening ceremonies, the crew proceeded to the Malacanang Palace for the reception where President Quezon welcomed them. After reading the letter, he gave speeches to congratulate the crew and reiterating once more the special commercial progress that will bring to the new Commonwealth. After the reception, Malacanang, the crew went to Manila Hotel, resting for a while and engaging in different press conference and social functions. The China Clipper departed Manila on Monday, December 2. It arrives in Guam 13 hours and 15 minutes. Then next day, traveled to Wake. It proceeded to Hawaii and Midway. And in December 6, it arrived in San Francisco, completing the first commercial trans-Pacific flight from the Orient to the New World. 6 days again, compared to the travel of Galleon from the Philippines to Mexico in 3 months. The flight of the China Clipper, although considered as the first, so that's the ticket number 1. Next slide, please. And that's the logbook. Next slide. Aside from revolutionizing the travel time of the Trans-Pacific crossing, the 3 Pan-American Clipper offered the most luxurious air travel at that time. 2 women who experienced traveling in the Clipper wrote their experiences. Next slide. One is Miss Helen Hegerman, who flew in 1937 and wrote a book entitled The Bride in the Philippine Clipper. According to her, photography aboard the Clipper, especially the surrounding waters of the islands, were prohibited due to the fear of spying. Next slide. Upon entering the aircraft, the passengers were impressed by interior, which was surprisingly large and very attractive. Upon takeoff, passengers were given gums and cottons to combat any inconveniences brought about by sudden change in altitude and pressure. Next slide. Above the air, the accommodation and the crew of the Clipper offered the most comfortable and luxurious way of flying above the Pacific Ocean. Food and beverages were included in the ticket and served in the lounge area. Next slide. The passenger described the lounge area in this way. The lounge where the passengers spend most of their time is very comfortable. We all introduce ourselves and by dinner time, we're very friendly and chatty. Meals aboard the Clipper were absolutely fantastic and food were always available on the buffet. Smoking was not allowed anywhere in the airplane. Next slide. At night, when the plane was still up in the air flying, passengers can sleep in bunk beds. Flying in an altitude of 10,000 to 12,000 feet, the temperature drops to close to frozen. But the heat provided by the aircraft and the warm blankets made sleeping comfortable. Next slide. Miss Hegerman described the sleeping quarter of the Clipper this way. There were 4 regular bunks. The bunks themselves were like Turkish bath as the heat of the plane came through the ceiling. I must admit, however, that I slept very well indeed. The sound of the motor is so steady that it doesn't bother you at all, and the plane itself is steadier than a train usually. On the night that the passengers were on the island stop, they were accommodated in a hotel owned by the Pan American Airways, thus adding luxury to the travel experience. Next slide. The Pacific Ocean twice separated the Philippines to its colonizer, Spain through Mexico and the United States. The successful spanning of this ocean means a successful control of the Philippines as a colony. The Spaniards successfully solved it through the Galleon trade, which connects Manila to Acapulco in Mexico. The treasures that it carries in immense size and the difficulties it faced in its journey made the Manila Galleon a legend and captured the imagination of the people during its time up to until the present. Kaya mas inyong museum, yung centerpiece ata ay Galleon. And then in the newly opened Museum of Mall of Asia, Galleon ulit. Hanggang ngayon, enduring ang legend ng Galleon, even in us, historian or student of history. The Americans, on the other hand, already have steamships that drastically shorten the trans-Pacific travel to a month. Yet this revolutionary vessel never captured the hearts and imagination of people, which the Galleon once did. Even in Philippine historiography, wala masyadong nagsusulat in history ng mga steamship na ginamit during the 18th, 19th, and the 20th century. Next slide. This will be done by the Pan-American Clippers, flying boat which will successfully cross the Pacific Ocean for commercial purposes. Hence, the Manila Galleon romanticized the sea journey in the Pacific, while the Pan-American Clippers romanticized the bucket. Next slide. Like the departure and the arrival of the Galleon, which has so many rituals and celebration, the departure and the arrival of the Pan-American Clipper has also its own fanfare. Speeches, letters, and congratulatory messages were given, and thousands of people from both sides of the Pacific witnessed it taking off and landing. The process of the Pacific, which is more or less than 6 days, is a wonder of communication and transportation that time. Next slide. Same with the galleons, the Clipper will also be viewed as a bringer of commercial progress in the colony. Like the Galleon, the Pan-American Clippers carry important persons, therefore the planes offer them the best accommodation as possible. Flying in the Clipper is one of a kind experience, which became a social symbol for that time. Next slide. The Pan-American Clippers crossed the Pacific Ocean until the war broke out between the United States and Japan. After the war, more advanced airplanes replaced them in this route. And actually, our very own Philippine Airlines proud itself to be the first Asian airlines to cross the Pacific Ocean in 1946, from Manila to San Francisco. After the war, more advanced airplanes replaced them in this route, but none of them matched the Pan-American Clippers in romance and legend. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.